On Twitch. Oh, you piece of shit. Okay.
Oh, nice. It tweeted.
Oh,
Nice.
cool.
Yeah.
All right. Going live on Facebook. We'll see how long Facebook lasts.
Yeah. It's
It's a great way to
Facebook.
reach people. They just are very, very particular about the content, but that's okay. All right, man. I think we're good.
All right. All right. All right. Today is Tuesday. It's the 14th, isn't it? Pi Day, 314.
It is. That's a very interesting fact that you just made me aware of.
I saw some other folks mention that today was Pi Day, and I
Well,
laughed.
well, regardless of what day it is, it's been a good day for Bitcoin. I mean, I think we hit as high as 26,000 earlier, and now we're kind of come off it a little bit. We're right at 25, but wow, what a reaction. I think Bitcoin's up 35% in the past, whatever, couple days.
Yeah, several days. Bit of a bit of a. I mean, it's a decisive, strong move higher. I mean, the sentiment the last couple days, just cherry picking a few things off of Twitter is that this whole banking crisis is what Bitcoin was. I mean, Bitcoin was created out of the ashes of the GFC, the Great Financial Crisis, and banks getting bailed out, and then here we are the last couple days with the not a bailout from the government here in the U.S. for the banks that failed, and very strong move to the upside the last day or two. And I'll argue that there's probably a lot of market participants are taking some profit at this particular stage. It looks like our high today was 26,553 according to the trading view chart. But we've come back, and I'm actually one of the things I was going to mention during our stream today is what happens when we start to see some pullbacks in price, and we've pulled back to 24,650-ish, 640-ish. Okay, it looks like there was some news, and I don't know what the news. I'm looking at Zero Hedge, so take that with a grain of salt too. But it looks like there's some incident with a drone and something to do with Russia. So classic algo selling probably going on right here in response to news, or it's a combination of some news items and with such a strong move to the upside so quickly that some people are taking profit. I mean, it's pure and simple. I'll also argue that there's probably a good number of trader focused types that are looking at this to try and fade a corrective move back towards, say 24,000, 23,000, which I would argue that if you look at the bottom-ish, so after Powell goes hawkish during his testimony, then we have the banks that failed, pulls us right down to 20,000. We dip below 20,000. A bunch of really strong hands move in, and we go from 20,000 all the way to 26,000. And what, 3 days? 1, 2, 3. So what, 1, 2, 3. Today's the fourth day of this price move higher. I would argue that there's probably some pretty strong profit taking and people waiting for pullbacks, and still dealing with the PTSD of the FTX nightmare, and then disbelief at the early part of the year rally, then feeling like, oh my God, it's over. We got rejected at 25,000 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And then in 4 days, we moved from 20,000 to 26,000, a little bit of profit taking going on here. And I'll argue that if you were long and strong up so far from the beginning of the year, for example, you're probably taking some off because we're coming up on the end of the quarter in about 2 weeks. So
Yeah, and that's when you talk about that, you're talking about kind of a trader's mindset.
yeah, I'm saying if you're in the business of trading and the way that you get paid and you earn your paycheck, you earn your living by moving in and out of positions and trying to be profitable, doing so because you have rent to pay, you have groceries to pay, you have a mortgage to pay, you have car payment. If you're in the business of trading and that is your business, then there are cycles, so to speak, and how people take risk on, or when the environment is risk on, they're long. When the environment is risk off, they're short, and they're trying to pull as much money, fiat money, out of the markets as possible, because that literally is the business that they're in. And that's what I mean by, if you're in the business of trading, you eventually have to pay yourself, and that's probably what's happening as we get into the first. We're rounding third base, okay, in terms of, like, if this was a baseball game and we're say in the fifth inning, for the first part of the year, so say we're in the third inning and we're rounding third base, and the end of the quarter we're trying to put our foot firmly down on home plate and score a run, for our business, meaning we took some risk and we need to get paid, and we're exiting our positions. That's probably what's happening here, given
Yeah.
my experience.
Yeah, and I think another thing to keep in mind too is this recent rally. I mean, you had CZ at Binance move his treasury from stable coins to Bitcoin and Ethereum. As much as we want to say, oh, look, Bitcoin's reacting to, the banks failing. Well, okay, fine, it is. And I think people are starting to wake up to the fact that, this is a good option for you. But, a lot of this move could have been, CZ moving $1 billion out of stablecoins back into Bitcoin and Ethereum, and that's something you just got to keep your eye on as we watch this. I've got a chart pulled up from our good buddy Rec Capital, and what he's talking about is 25,000 being the key resistance level in the downward trend. And so what you want to see is Bitcoin break above that and then close above that, right? And so what we saw today was it shot way above it, and now it's coming back down, and where it sits currently, it doesn't look like it's going to close above the $25,000 resistance line there if it were to close right now. But like you said, there was some news that came out, and all that stuff. I mean, interesting timing with banks collapsing, that you get this news, right? Like, it's strange how all that kind of works together, but it is what it is. And so, regardless of all that, very positive price action today so far on Bitcoin, and the reaction to some of these moves that the federal government's making. And it's interesting, right? Because we were talking earlier, if the federal government, if the feds are going to backstop all deposits and interest rates are 4.5%, 5%, why would anybody take any risk? Why would I own real estate? Why would I own anything else? Because they're just saying that it doesn't matter what happens. We're going to guarantee all deposits. I don't care if these banks make good or bad decisions. The Fed's just going to backstop everything. I mean, doesn't that unleash a whole nother bag of worms here?
Yeah, it's sending a message that is probably being interpreted in many different ways, like we are just discussing. Or you might even go so far as to say it's mixed messages from the government. The government wants to, we're supposed to be the free enterprise system and a capitalist society, but you're basically saying that we're not gonna. If you take any risk, or if any risk gets taken in the marketplace or in the world, you don't have to worry about the losses, because we'll backfill those.
Yeah, but if I go out and take a risk and lose, they don't backfill me.
You, as the individual taxpayer, no. But if you're
If I have a banking license, then I can take unlimited risk.
yeah, then if you're a bank and you greased enough palms in the political circles and know the right people, and then you're in good shape.
Some would call that a two-tiered system, Ted.
Some would call it a two-tiered system. I agree with that, and I'd say that I don't know how people think they can get away with it, but I don't know what the world is like in the second tier. I'm not in the second tier of the
And
two
neither
tier
do
system.
I. But I think for all of us, plebs in the first tier, right, that don't have a banking license and can't apparently take unlimited risk, I think, again, we come back to Bitcoin and saying, look, this is an option to exit that system, right? And say, look, I don't want to participate in this. You have different rules than I have. I don't think this is fair. I'm going to vote no to all this by buying Bitcoin.
Yeah, there's I'm looking at trying to find this thing that I saw earlier. There's a lot of question around whether or not you should save your money in a bank, because if the bank can take unlimited risk, and but if what if the bank isn't the kind of bank that the government feels like saving? Then you lose. You're taking, just by putting your money somewhere to save it, you're taking outsized risk. To your money is at greater risk than if it wasn't even in the bank. So this reminds me of people making fun of our grandparents' generation that were taking cash and stuffing it in mattresses, and because they were scared of putting it in the bank because they didn't want to lose it. Ironically enough.
Nothing new under the sun, apparently.
That's right. So here we are in the digital. We're in the 21st century now. We're in the digital age, the age of information, the age of the internet, and we are terrified now as a society that the hard-earned money that we are we are now terrified of losing our hard-earned money by putting it into the banks that tell us that everything's going to be okay. Your money is safe here. We have your FDIC insured, except what the banks don't tell you is that they're going to go take outsized risk and gamble with your deposits, and then hopefully, if you have less, if you're FDIC insured, then if you don't have 250,000, then you're okay. But if you don't, what are you going to do? And Twitter has been alight the last couple of days with these really great memes about how so and so had 14 bank accounts, and that it was okay because he was just practicing good treasury management. And so hilarious. But the reality is very painful, though. I mean, I mentioned on a prior broadcast that in my experience, just some random guy, I've witnessed this and talked at length about how corporations or small privately owned companies have been in the situations where they were spreading their money around different banks because they had, $5 million or $8 million in cash to operate with, but they were terrified of having it all in one institution and in one set of accounts because it was more than 250,000, and they weren't willing to. This was years ago too, and so imagine how they're probably shaking their fist, feeling vindicated and saying, "I told you so." And man, this is what a time to be alive.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because most people don't have that problem, but the idea in our society is to get to a point where this is the stuff people don't think about. Everybody thinks they want to be a millionaire, but there's a great saying, when you get rich, your problems don't go away, you just have new problems, right? There's you're always going to have problems. They're just different kinds of problems, right? And so now you've got people who haven't been paying attention to this, that are rich, and this might shock you. A lot of people that are rich are not necessarily smart, right? Okay, so they haven't been, they just assume their money's safe. Well, Monday comes and Silicon Valley Bank goes bust. Signature Bank gets closed. I don't know if they were doing anything bad or not. I don't fully know that story yet. I don't think anybody does. But you're going, hold on a second. I've got 10 million in a bank. Is it? And then the question comes, is it safe? And then the next thing is, oh my God, what do I do? You call the bank, they're going to say it's fine, right? And chances are, it probably is. Again, we're not live streaming trying to incite panic. We're not Senator Warren. We don't get a free run at inciting a bank run, then celebrate it on Twitter. I mean, I think that woman should be investigated and thrown in jail, if not thrown out of, Congress or the Senate or wherever she's at. I mean, that to me is unthinkable. She was literally cheering on bank runs. That's the leadership in this country we have today.
Yeah, I mean, imagine like if you or I were to use a platform like this to explicitly do the thing which we're saying not to do, of course, just saying. Now imagine what would happen and the legal defense we'd have to mount if we did that. Uh, Senator Warren's not going to have to do that. She's not going to have to. It's very unlikely that she's going to have to answer to anyone or explain why she made those statements to anyone because of who she is and the people she's surrounded by and all of the palms that she's been able to grease. I mean, this is the world we live in. I mean, I'm picking on Elizabeth Warren because she made some stupid comments, and she happens to be on one side of the aisle. But imagine if somebody else on the other side of the aisle did it in this particular administration, in this iteration of Congress, and this iteration of the the the, the political apparatus in Washington today. They'd already be like at trial, and they'd already be ready to throw them in prison, and
Oh
that's
God!
just the way it is.
Imagine if Trump did that. There would be the CNN would be a nonstop like parade of legal experts and you know condemning him, saying impeach him. I mean,
Yeah,
it's just it's so silly. Like it's so why waste time talking about these people? I mean, you know the thing is that there's an issue, right? And the issue is that these banks, you know, they bought risk-free bonds and got burnt, right? Because what they do, they didn't hedge, right? And there's arguments that said, you know, look, the hedging wouldn't have worked, but it failed because they were incentivized to buy the bonds, and then when rates went up, the bonds became worthless or worth less, right? Like, you know, and this is a major banking institution in the United States. You know, how does this stuff happen, right? Like, you know, these things aren't supposed to happen. In 2008, they passed all these laws, Ted. Like, you know, they made sure they took steps to make sure this would never happen again. And here we are with the same thing happening again. You know,
yeah. It's just was it Yellen that was quoted not too long ago that we'll never see it. We'll never live to see another financial crisis in our lifetime. And yet here we are in the midst of. I mean, I don't care I don't care what anybody says. This is crisis level situation, in my opinion, because it had the potential to really get out of hand, and thankfully it hasn't gotten out of hand. But the reality is that the conditions were present for a banking institution to take the kind of risks that they were able to take and got themselves into a situation. And in order to prevent further fallout and further panic and chaos, the government had to step in. So, I mean, we're not these. I guess as the saying goes, this happened in the past. It's going to happen again, and you just got to try and be prepared for it. I don't know how do we prepare. I mean, how many people were really prepared for this? Unless you were buying Bitcoin. Although we were buying Bitcoin in December, and before that, and we were buying it in January and February, and we weren't doing it necessarily because we thought this particular crisis scenario was going to unfold. We just knew that we buy Bitcoin because we want to have control over our money. We don't want someone else to be able to take it and do things with it and be able to seize it from us. Last time I checked, this was a free country, and we should be able to have control over our money. I mean, we trade our time and our energy in the labor force to be compensated for that, and it's time we don't get back. And then so it's something we willingly trade, but then to add insult to injury, the units of currency that we receive are already being debased over time. It buys less, and now I have to work more. And because of monetary and fiscal policy, we have to invest in order to stay ahead. We have to take outsized risk as individuals, and some say the American dream is under attack because it used to be, go back 50, 60 years, you could work, you could provide for a family, and you can be prepared for your golden years without having to invest like crazy. Although I'm not saying I don't like investing. I'm just saying that it feels more necessary than ever to put your money to work, so that at a minimum just to stay ahead. I mean, this get rich quick stuff is ridiculous. You know, the idea of getting rich quick just seems further and further like a pipe dream than anything else,
Well,
for
yeah,
the average person.
if you, unfortunately, it's the things are set up today where you have to take risk in order to get ahead, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's kind of the way it's always been. But what they're forcing people to do is there's an outsized majority of people having to take risks that might not be, I guess, ready to or want to. There's a huge difference between an entrepreneur embarking on a business and understanding the risk versus a normal person having to go out and try to figure out how to make more than 7% or 6% or whatever just to keep up with inflation. I mean, that is a problem. And I'll tell you something else that I learned when I was traveling, and I firmly believe this: the American dream was a marketing scam. And that may sound crazy, but think about it like this for a second. The American dream used to be a house with a white picket fence, right? Well, how do you get a house with a white picket fence? You go to a bank and get a mortgage. The American dream was an idea perpetrated on the public to sell mortgages. The banks had a product, and it was a phenomenal marketing scheme. It worked. Everybody in the world wanted a house with a white picket fence, right? The American dream is no longer a house with a white picket fence, and it's no longer an American phenomenon. I'll tell you factually, I went all over the world, met kids our age. It's not an American dream. It's a world dream, and the dream is this: we want to be financially independent. We want the governments to leave us alone, and we want to be able to make a way for ourselves. That's not uniquely American. Maybe it was 30 years ago, but the world's changed, and it's continuing to change, right? And so when I hear people talk about this stuff and just through an American lens, and we were talking about this earlier, the reason crypto and Bitcoin are great is because it's global. And if you've not left the United States, you don't understand the amount of talent and the amount of brain power that exists outside of this country. It is huge. It is huge.
Yeah.
I was told to stop using the F bomb, so I'm not going to use it. But like, even though I like to drop it every now and then, but it's huge. And we see this from a United States centric point of view. And I think a lot of people that comment on this and talk about it, they fail to recognize this is a global phenomenon. So if these banks and this government wants to crack down on innovation and entrepreneurs inside this United States, they're going to miss out on the next 30 years of innovation for political reasons, right? And they can't see the forest through the trees. And I don't know what their motivation is. I'm not going to speculate, but it's absurd to me. Dubai is going to be huge. Singapore is going to be huge. They're just giving it away on a silver platter. Maybe maybe the people running this country want that. Maybe, that's the only thing I can think of, that you've got people here that are not rooting for the United States, that are actually leading the United States, because it feels like that, right? Like every action they take is against the normal person. And at some point, we'll just be fed up with it. And again, that's not Republican or Democrat, right? There's leaders on both sides of the aisle that you look at and you say, what are you doing? Like this is not an American policy. And look, we don't have to be, woohoo, rah, rah, America all the time, right? But it's our home country, right? But these people fail to recognize the amount of talent that exists in the rest of the world that is waking up to the fact that this system is not designed for them. It's not designed for the normal people in the United States, but it sure as shit isn't designed for the normal guy in Croatia or Spain or Kuala Lumpur or Brazil, who all are affected by the US dollar, right? And so it's real easy for them to say, God, forget this. I'm not going to use this. Why wouldn't I just opt into the Bitcoin network, right? Like this to me is so short-sighted, and it doesn't make any sense why they're taking this approach, right? I had this idea today that I'd love to go meet with my senators or my local people and sit down and talk with them. But it's like you feel like that's the enemy, right? It shouldn't be like that. They should be working with us, with our industry, with any industry that's looking to grow and innovate. Like it shouldn't feel like we're being attacked at every corner. and it's funny they rip Bitcoin and their banks fail. Like,
Yeah,
talk
hilarious, huh?
about irony. Like, come on, guys. At some point, people will stop listening to these people. Like they just don't deserve to be where they are, right? They've gotten there through politicking and lobbying, and they've not run businesses, they've not created jobs. Joe Biden has been a career politician for 500 years, right? Like, it's amazing to me the amount of power and control these people have and how they've gotten it. I mean, I don't know, rant over. I could go on, but like, you get the
No,
point. Like,
you're
you
making
know what I'm
some.
trying to say.
You're making a good point. Is I think there's an undercurrent or a thread that is being exposed, or that or at least I'm starting to see more, is that there's this, and it's in the same in line with this idea that Bitcoin is permissionless, borderless money. And what I'm trying to say is that people around the world basically want the same thing, the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness kind of thing. They want the government to leave them the hell alone, mostly, and they want prosperity. And what I'm trying to say here is this thread thing that I'm harping on about for the moment is this awakening, and it has to do with the realization that this borderless, permissionless, decentralized global monetary network that is the Bitcoin network, and then the layer 2 Lightning on top of that. And people are starting to, at the individual level, and we've talked about this before, is that Bitcoin is going to continue to win one individual wallet holder at a time as they go through the beautiful process of shedding their legacy upbringing and mindset, and perhaps conditioning that the government issues money and the government controls your money and there's nothing you can do about it. And the Bitcoin it stands directly in defiance of that, to say, we're not going to, like, Bitcoin doesn't rely on centralized authority, which always ends up being corrupted at some point. It has failed throughout history. And now you have the ability to take possession of your money in a way that you never have been able to do before. And if you think of this, what you have when you buy Bitcoin, I'll use Michael Saylor's example of property, is that in the past, and even today, you buy property. I own some property, but I can't take it with me somewhere else. When Civil War breaks out in this fantasy thing that I'm ranting about now, and somebody attacks and wants to take my property, they just shoot me and they take it, and nobody can stop them. And I have to defend it if I want to keep it. And how does that happen? And what happens? It's taxed every year, and its value is under attack. And there's eminent domain. It can be taken away from me. But forget about that for a second. Now think about Bitcoin as digital property, or as this ultrasound monetary network, is that I can own a piece of it. I can take it with me wherever I go. No one can steal it from me without knowing certain things. And this concept that, and let me illustrate further. If I want to store value in it, I can. And the next day, I have the same amount. It hasn't been debased, or it hasn't been diluted. It's like having a glass of iced tea, and I drink some of it and then pour some more water into it, and the glass looks full, but it's not the same tea that I just had. This idea of dilution is something that takes a while to permeate inside one's mind. But the point I'm trying to get to is that the dollars that we have today, for example, or the euros or the yen or the pounds that we have today, are ultimately under attack in many ways by all kinds of external factors, internal factors. Every time more money is created, that your money buys less. That doesn't happen with Bitcoin. And that's what I'm trying to say is that people are discovering and learning these things every day of the year. And as more and more individuals around the world start to realize that they can take some of the power back and have the proverbial self becoming more and more self-sovereign, they can mentally push back against being afraid of the government or afraid of people taking what's theirs, and start to realize that there are others around the world that feel this way, not just locally, but even around the world. I mean, this idea of Bitcoin being the thing that it is not, it's not unique to any one place on Earth,
Well, yeah,
because
the human experience is not unique to the United States. Like, and this is
exactly.
something I see people mess up all the time, right? The world is an awesome place full of beautiful, smart people, right? This isn't, what happens here affects the rest of the world because over the last 100 years, the United States has been able to use, its central bank and fractional reserve banking to get power over the rest of the world, right? And that's what you hear these really smart people talk about. Well, the United States will never let Bitcoin happen because that they use the money to control the world. And you're going, all right, well, like who wants that? Like do you think the people up until Bitcoin there was no better option, right? Because you could buy gold, right? But then you got to carry rocks around with you, right? There's nothing against gold. I like gold, but like, or you have to trust that the government says if your money's backed on gold, you have to trust the government says they have the gold they say they do. And let me tell you something, spoiler alert, they don't, right? Over time, they'll fractionalize it out, they'll rehypothecate it, they'll lend the same gold bar to 10 people, right? Like the human greed is the problem with the fiat system. It's the problem with gold. And Bitcoin solves that because you can't change the rules, right? You need a 51% consensus, and nobody's going to do that because it's not in the best interest of the network, right? Like, and that's the stuff that I guess the hard part when you're first learning about this stuff is that, and I say it all the time, before you learn about Bitcoin, start learning about how our money works. Because once you learn how our money works, you're going to scratch your head and go, I was lied to for 40 years, for 20 years, for, it's almost unthinkable what's happened and how it's happened. And people shouldn't be afraid of their government, right? And that's or their banks, right? That shouldn't be the way it is. But right now, in the world we live in, we have that problem. All right, so you have to look at it and you have to go, what are my options as a normal person, right? Like, what can I do? Well, I can't run down to City Hall and yell into the ether because nobody's going to care, right? Like, they'll just shuffle me aside. They don't want to hear it. They might say they do, but they don't, right? Like, but like we talked about yesterday, you can email your senators, you can buy Bitcoin, right? Like, that's it. Like, what do you do? Like, you vote with your money, you vote with your wallet, and the price you pay to own your money in a decentralized, trustless manner is volatility, and the price volatility is U.S. dollars, right? And so, there's trade-offs in everything. You can leave all your money in a bank, and you can lose 7 to 20% a year in inflation and purchasing power. That's fine. Nobody's going to stop you from doing that, except maybe the bank, who will lose it gambling on mismatched duration bonds. Which, by the way, who the hell heard of that until 3 days ago, right? Like,
Exactly.
or you can take control of it and understand that Bitcoin is a fixed supply. There's only going to be 21 million of them. The amount of Bitcoin that's released into circulation every 4 years gets cut in half. And these are things that everybody comes to on their own. We're trying to help people get there. We're doing these live streams. We're going to build out content, and there's a lot of great content that's already out there, right? And so you can go follow Michael Saylor. You can go to 99bitcoins.com. There's all kinds of resources out there to help you learn about this stuff. But like Ted was saying, Bitcoin wins one mind at a time, right? And we're all out here trying to do our best to help people understand why they should consider this. And what's great for us is the banks are doing the work for us, right? Like, if I'm a Bitcoin advocate, all I have to do is say, turn on the TV. And all you'll see is Silicon Valley Bank failed, Signature Bank failed, Silvergate failed, and I'm sure there's going to be more. Like, right? There's never one cockroach, right? I forget, one of the Bitcoin guys says that. It's pretty funny, right? There's
That
always
is,
there's always more, but you know that's why we're advocates for Bitcoin. That's why we think everybody should own some as a percentage of their portfolio. That's why we do this because, look, when if heaven forbid something happened that was catastrophic, what are you gonna do, right? Like the answer is you better have cash on hand, right? And it doesn't have to be a lot. Like you better have some gold, you better have some Bitcoin, and you can argue with me about gold versus Bitcoin, whatever, all day long. I don't care. Like, it doesn't matter to me. If you don't like Bitcoin, don't buy it. Like, it's like the Will Ferrell. Good, more for me. Like, whatever. Like, I don't care. Like, but if you do your research and you do the work to understand it, chances are you're going to be calling me, Josh. Like, I think I want to get into Bitcoin. Like, what is the best way to do that? I mean, what do you think, Ted?
well, I'll make an analogy. It's like you can check the weather forecast, and it says maybe it might rain. It's going to tell you what you think the temperature, or what they think the air temperature is going to be that day. But still, if you leave the house and you think it might rain, you might want to bring an umbrella with you, because what happens if what have you got your nice clothes on, you got your nice watch on, and you get caught in a storm, and all of your nice stuff gets damaged. Your phone, for example, which has has your whole life on it. You you can walk around without the umbrella and hope you don't get rained on, because there's all these variables there. I mean, there's an infinite number of variables in the weather example here, just like there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people working in the financial system, all making different decisions and all different personality types. And I mean, take one bank like Wells Fargo. I'm picking on Wells Fargo because it's the first one I thought of. But how many people work at Wells Fargo, and how many times have individuals or groups of individuals inside these big corporations made really, really bad decisions, and they got caught with their pants down and caused a lot of problems for people? And the government either had to step in to bail them out, or they prosecuted them, they went to jail, and people lost money, or their trust was damaged. I mean, so the point I'm trying to make is that you don't get into your car, or most people don't get into their car to go drive somewhere and not put their seatbelt on. You may or may not drive around without car insurance, but the reality is that you don't need those things every single time. But the one time that you do need them and you don't have them, it's a very unpleasant day. And so what I'm trying to say here is that there are people in the world, and people are what make up these corporate bodies of these companies, that some of them make good decisions, some of them make less than good decisions, but it doesn't matter. They don't know you personally, but that doesn't stop these things from happening and having real effects on your life. So how do you protect yourself? Well, you learn first, and then you make some decisions about, like, given my particular financial situation, the way I earn my income, where I live, what my tax structure is like. Should I be protecting myself by owning different types of investments like gold or Bitcoin, or should I be buying bonds? I mean, these are not questions that we can answer. We can only talk about what we think we know, and that we know that Bitcoin is one of the best ways to protect some of your wealth. And just like there are other types of investments that are designed to do the same things. But given the world that we live in and the world that we see and where we think the future's headed, we're really in the early stages of the digital age and the golden age of information. And
I wanna bring something up real quick that I always
Sure.
think is funny, that I think people should pay attention to. So we're out here, advocating that you learn about Bitcoin, and potentially, if you come to the conclusion we have, allocate a certain percentage of your portfolio to that. I always laugh when I hear gold guys on podcasts or YouTube. They advocate how great gold is, and they want to, it's a store of wealth. It's been around for 5,000 years, and they list all the benefits. And then at the end, you get hit with, use my referral link to buy gold at X, or you go to my website to buy gold. Like you just, how do I believe anything you just said about gold when you just tried to show me a link to go buy gold? We're doing this. We don't have links to go buy Bitcoin. We don't make money when people go buy Bitcoin. There's no but it always makes me laugh because it's like, if these guys were intellectually honest, they would see that, there are aspects of Bitcoin that are superior to gold. And I'm not saying gold is a bad investment. I just think it's funny when you listen to most of these gold experts, there's always a sale at the end, right? Like there's always this, pitch at the end, like buy gold from me. All right, well,
Yeah.
like I'd take you more seriously if you gave me your competitor's link. Like I, like, hey, I really think you should have some gold. I believe in it so much you should use this person's link. Like, come
Yeah,
on, man.
exactly. Like there's an ulterior motive here, and back to what I was saying before, the human condition takes it takes many, 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 like an infinite number of forms, and sometimes people don't have your best interest in mind. All I'm trying to tell you
Yeah,
is that
it's true.
all I'm trying to say here is that if you take a little bit of time and start to understand at the very simplest and highest levels where, just here in the US, for example, where US dollars come from and how we got to now. There's a good TV show on a long time ago called How We Got to Now. It was really great. Like the light bulb was one of the things. Like, how did we get to now with the light bulb? And they go rewind the tape and go back to the beginning before the light bulb and talk about all of the trials and tribulations and all that great stuff. But if you rewind the tape a little bit, and I mean, the internet is a magical thing with lots of information. You can spend very little energy to learn a lot here. And what I'm trying to say is you start to peel back the layers here and look at how money comes to exist in this particular in our financial system here domestically, and it raises more questions. You start to think, well, wait a minute, what about this and how come that? And you start getting answers to those questions, and it starts to help you understand why some of these things happen. And it's different for everyone. I remember buying my first house in 2008 at the absolute peak of the financial crisis, like right when it was starting. The house of cards was starting to tumble apart. I had no idea. I didn't know how money worked. I was young. I needed a place to live. I was tired of renting, and I got excited and found a place that I liked and bought the house. I didn't understand that I was buying. I was classic top signal was me buying the house. That
Last
would have
man
been.
holding the bag.
Yeah, and I literally held the bag for 12 years.
But
Okay.
what's funny about that is everybody in that process of you buying a house, not one of them ever told you, hey, look, the market's probably a little overheated right now. You should back off. Not your real estate agent, not your
Nope.
banker,
Nope.
nobody, right? And that we're in the same situation now with real estate, right? Like, but again, like, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
That's all right. I'm glad you brought that up because everyone at every step of the way was selling me a bill of goods and telling me everything was going to be fine and that it was the right thing to do because they were making they were pushing the hot potato off on me. Okay. And out of the ashes, and I mean, but was it really that bad for me? No, I didn't have to sell the house immediately. I didn't buy it with money that I didn't have. I mean, I put some money down and had a mortgage payment that I could afford. I was employed, thankfully. Very grateful for all those things. But the reality is I didn't understand how the financial system had gotten so corroded internally and how fragile everything had become, and proceeded to get a pretty like I'll call it a sharp lesson in as things started to unravel, and watching the news and then talking to people and then looking at people trying to sell their homes and people living on the street, 5 or 6 of the houses on the little maybe 40 units of these townhouses, like 6 or 7 of them got foreclosed on within like 6 months because it was very illuminating and terrifying at the same time, but it really helped grease the skids, or I should say it greased the wheels for me to start peeling back the layers, as I was just describing, a little bit at a time, and understanding where money comes from, and how the financial system works and why, like, why did this unravel in the GFC like it did? Like, what happened? And you know, in post-mortem style, talking to people and learning like where they were when things started to unravel. People that were working in the mortgage business, for example, like this gentleman that I am still in contact with today, but back then he was working for Countrywide Mortgage. Okay, and man, back to what you were just asking me a minute ago about, did somebody stop me from doing this? Did somebody stop me from doing that? Did anybody warn me about anything? And the answer was no. He, with his own words, said, I was part of the problem because I was helping people in that, back in those days, I was helping them get the documentation sorted out with their income so that they could qualify for the 5-1 ARM, the adjustable rate mortgages, with very little income, no down payment, no problem. You just pay the interest on. He was telling people that their mortgage payment was only going to be, X amount of dollars, without fully communicating to them, and them not understanding either that it was just the interest portion they were paying. They weren't making any principal payments, and then lo and behold, as these mortgages came to the readjustment phase and prices, market values plummeted, their mortgages reset to be almost double and sometimes triple in some cases. It just further added to the madness. But his own words were, I contributed to the problem and I got paid handsomely to do it. And I was no way I was going to tell somebody that they weren't going to be able to qualify for this. So
no, that's perfect, because I want to articulate a point here that I think is really important that people might not understand. Given what we saw in 2008 with happened with real estate, given what we're seeing with banks now, let me ask you a question. If you had $1 million to invest, all right, so are you going to, let's take Austin, Texas. If I could buy a condo in Austin, I'll use exact numbers here, for $1.5 million. It cost me, outside of my mortgage and the interest on that mortgage, between HOA fees and real estate taxes, $40,000 a year to live in that apartment. To rent, I can rent the same square foot apartment for $2,500 a month, right? What am I going to do? I'm going to rent the thing because it costs me more to own the thing, all right? So what do I do with the equity? Do I put it in a bank? I don't know. Probably not, where I'm going to lose 6 to 20% due to inflation and maybe the whole lot of money. Or do I put that equity in a global monetary system that's decentralized across the entire earth, that's trustless, that the rules don't change, there's a fixed cap supply, that I know that every day that goes by, more people are waking up to and understand the importance of. And I don't know what's going to be built on top of the Bitcoin network. This is the same analogy as real estate, buying land on Michigan Avenue in Chicago in 1900. I have no idea what they're going to build on top of the network, but I know whatever it is, it's going to be extremely valuable to own a piece of that network. So where am I going to put my equity as a 20 to 40-year-old who's in the prime of his work life, who wants to be able to have purchasing power out in the future? I'm not going to leave it in a bank, and I'm not going to put it in real estate, right? It just doesn't make sense. Now, there's certain types of real estate that make sense, but like my personal home, I'll just rent. Forget it. I don't want my equity stored in something that could dump 30 to 70% based off what? Like based off the flimsiness of the financial system, right? And also houses are crazy, right? It's the only thing that you build 40 years later, they become worth more. That concept alone is kind of funny to me. But I choose to store my wealth in Bitcoin amongst other things, but because of that reason, right? I don't want to have my equity in a home, right? That's worked for a very long time. But in 2008, we started to see that doesn't always work, right? And so if I've accumulated X amount of wealth, where do I want to put it? And for me, based off the research that I did, and this is thousands, if not tens of thousands of hours listening to this stuff and talking to people, the answer is Bitcoin. And I think you're going to see more and more people come to the same conclusion, not because I came to that conclusion, because people are smart. And when they look at the information and they look at the available options, they're going to say, oh my God, why would I put my money anywhere else, right? And so we're early in this. There's volatility. That's part of the price you pay for being able to control your own money. I mean, that's just part of the deal. The network's still growing. If you look at S curves and adoption rates and mobile phones and everything, it's on the exact same path, only faster than all of that. So when Bitcoin gets to 16,000, I just laugh and say, thank God that I'm able to buy more of it, right? Because you don't look at it as buying, you're buying a percentage of the total network every time you buy, whether that's $100 or $100 million, right? It scales indefinitely. And that's the beauty of it. Everybody has access. Everybody can buy a percentage of this network. You couldn't buy a percentage of the internet or HTML, right? You couldn't do that, but you can buy a percentage of the Bitcoin monetary network. And I don't think people have fully understood what that means. I mean, you're sitting here, it blows my mind, right? It just blows my mind that people aren't bothered to take the time to sit down. And honestly, it would take you 100 hours to get a good grasp on it, but 100 hours goes fast. I mean, because this stuff is so interesting. But that's just a little rant I wanted to throw in there. We're talking about real estate and like, where do you put your money, right? And like, look, this again, I have no problem admitting this. I could be completely wrong. Like, I'm not saying that like this is a panacea and there's no room for argument and that everybody. I do not recommend you do what I do, right? Like, I just don't. It's not financial advice. Don't do it unless you do the research and you come to that conclusion on your own. But I just think you're going to start to see the world look at real estate less as a equity store of value and look, because the whole world's going online. Everything, all value is going digital, and people are going to sit there and they're going to refuse to believe it, and they're going to say, and they're going to watch all this stuff take off, and they're going to be sidelined in assets that are now worth less than they ever thought they'd be because they didn't do the work.
Yeah, the thing that really just, if I could help anyone on earth understand the simple, or to me is now a simple concept, is that the unit, the individual units of Bitcoin, the Satoshis that constitute a whole unit, that's there's a mathematical principle that's part of the Bitcoin network that limits the amount of those that will ever exist. Okay, it's the halving cycle is what people call Bitcoin's monetary policy. Means every 10 minutes a new block is mined into the ledger for eternity, and as a result, as a reward for the miners having mined that, whoever mined that block successfully gets a payout from the network. So a little bit of Bitcoin is created every 10 minutes, but that addition to the supply is controlled and limited, not by one person, not by any persons. It's limited by the network itself. And that can't be messed with, okay, in easy terms. What I'm trying to say is that we know, because all of the participant units, computational units, meaning members of the network, the nodes, whether they're mining nodes or any other type of node, they all agree on the monetary policy at all times. And where I'm going with this is that if you contrast that to, and the thing I'm trying to really drive home here is that the individual units can't be sliced up and diluted any further than they already are. Okay, so contrast that though with the fiat monetary system and US dollars, for example. And what we just witnessed again is a scenario where there was a crisis and the Federal Reserve had to create more dollars than existed the day before, for example, and put those into the system. And what I'm trying to say here is that the risk to the US dollar is not, some other country or anything like that. It's the real risk is that more of them keep getting created and put into the system, and therefore the purchasing power that existed prior is now less than it was before. And you can spend lots of time listening to, I would recommend you listen to Michael Saylor talk about going to Wall Street and talking about how they valued MicroStrategy as a business. And when you say, well, we own these buildings and we have this stuff, we have this intellectual property, and then we have our stock, and then we have our cash, and to have the people on Wall Street tell him, well, we don't value the cash at what you like. For example, he talks a lot about it. It was like we have $500 million in cash, and they said, well, we discount the cash value, and he was, well, like, well, wait a minute, what do you mean you're discounting the value of my cash? It's $500 million. Like it's like there's a fixed number of dollars, but the people on Wall Street would say, and did say, well, we discount the cash by at least 10%, because if you're not taking the cash and putting it into, say, the S&P 500, if you're not beating the S&P 500, you're falling behind every year. So think about that for a second. Your 500 million, or your $5, or anything in between, or your 5 billion is not the same 5 billion a year later, because of the way our system works. Like, is that like, am I getting, I mean, are you at least tracking with me here, Josh?
I track 100%. And the problem
Okay.
is what they're doing, what they have been doing. It's going to take more and more risks to keep outpacing inflation, and you
There you
can't.
go.
That doesn't work forever, right? And that's where we're at. And so, what you do is you look for alternatives that are outside of that system. Bitcoin's one. Art, really nice wine. I got a buddy that has 2,000 bottles of bourbon. If the world goes to hell, he's going to be fine because he'll be able to trade bourbon for whatever. But
There you go.
you got to put your money somewhere that isn't being debased constantly. And like that's what's so hard about all this, because the average working person goes, "Hold on a second. I'm doing everything he told me to. I got a job. I'm busting my ass. I'm making the most money I possibly can. And every time I turn around, either the federal government's debasing it, the bank's losing it, or they're taxing it away. Like, what the hell's going on, guys? Like, or they're sending it to foreign countries for whatever reason. We don't have to get into it, but like, it's a nonstop train of bullshit, right? And people are tired of that. And so here we are sitting here as normal Bitcoin nerds saying, hey, welcome. We have something you might enjoy, friend. Everybody's welcome to this. You can join or not join. There's no mandatory requirement. Participation is optional. However, if you're in the situation that I just described, you might consider purchasing some of the monetary network. Like there's no minimums, there's no maximums. Everybody's welcome to play.
Yeah, I just the watershed moment, or the like light in the attic moment for me personally, was when it dawned on me, which is somewhat ironic as I sit here and I think about how ironic it is, having worked in software and understanding basic things like cryptography, for example, having worked for an identity provider that used PKI, or public key infrastructure. I understood the concepts of cryptography, and you don't have to know any of this stuff. Like, you just, like the saying is, you don't have to know how the watch was made to be able to tell time. Okay, you don't have to know how Bitcoin works functionally to know how it works, or to know that it does work and see that it works. And you can trust that when you fire up a node, or you go to some resource that's connected to the you go to some resource and you look at the price of Bitcoin, or if you look at the supply of Bitcoin, you can know for sure that that's how much Bitcoin exists today. And the other way I'll paint this picture is like early days in my trading career, when I started day trading with very little money, thankfully, I learned the very, very hard way about how units of company equities, shares of stock, are not that much different than what the Fed does with units of money, meaning US dollars. They can issue more of them. And back to the stock example, if a company puts 1 million shares up to trade, and the public market participants are buying and selling the shares, a classic pump and dump tactic, especially in what they call the low float penny stock world, where there's a low number of shares. What'll happen is that the company will issue some shares, and then they'll issue some press releases. The price of the stock will go up, and what they'll do is they'll do what's called an offering. They'll issue more shares. Let's say there's 1 million outstanding shares. They'll issue another 1 million. So let's say they're $1 a piece that day, and they issue another 1 million. Now there's 2 million. And if you look at the amount of money that was put up to value these shares initially, at $1 a piece. Now there's double the shares. Guess what happens to the share price? It's cut in half immediately. So if you bought the shares at $1, your shares now worth 50 cents. Did you do anything wrong? No, you bought the shares. But but this concept of dilution and the supply is outright manipulation of the supply of the units that causes the volatility in that particular context. Now, contrast that to the way that the supply of Bitcoin is managed with no intervention from any humans at this point, and you can know that the Bitcoin you buy today is not going to be diluted and debased in itself. I mean, it may change in terms of US dollar price that day, a euro price, Japanese yen price, Great British pounds, or any other currency. When you're pricing it in other currencies, yes, there will be fluctuations in price because some days people will pay more for it than other days. But what I'm trying to really drive home here is that Bitcoin itself doesn't change. The US dollar, there's more of them get pumped into the system every single day of the year. So the supply is constantly growing, despite what anybody tells you. You look at our deficits,
I was laughing today when I saw Charles Schwab, the CEO, about like 50,000 shares of the company. I was like, man, that's the same vibes as Caroline Ellison coming out and saying, I'll buy all the FTT for $22. It's like, I get that it's not the same thing, but I was just laughing because I'm like, same vibes, man. Like, they're trying to ensure confidence in the, and maybe
Jamie Dimon did this with JP Morgan stock. He bought, there was some news event. People were mad because they bought shares and they were worth half what they were before. And then, but like a savvy business person, a savvy investor, Jamie Dimon didn't pay full price for the shares. He waited till the share price came down. And what did he do? He bought some of his own stock and then it went higher. Okay, but the thing is that in the Schwab example and the JP Morgan example, especially in the FTT example, every one of those corporations, they were the ones issuing the shares that they were buying back to instill confidence. So what do you think is going to be good for the goose in this case? It's not good for the gander, is that when the share price doubles, for example, they can just issue more shares to sell to the open public and take that money and watch the share price go back down and then do whatever they want. They can even buy the shares back. I mean, it's just, the point I'm trying to make here is that they issue the share. They are the issuer of the shares. You as an individual market participant have no say. I mean, you can be a shareholder, you can go to their meetings, you can shake your fist at them. They're not going to change it's not going to influence them. You're not an
amazing
activist.
It's amazing level. It's amazing for how much grief crypto gets, the similarities in the traditional system, right? Like,
what do you think these people learned? I'm talking about the charlatans and the snake oil salespeople came from traditional finance when they learned there's this new thing called crypto.
Nothing new under the sun, is there?
Nothing new under the sun. We can make our own tokens. We can issue as many as we want, and we can dump them on anybody. And that's not what Bitcoin is, and that's not how Bitcoin operates. And there's no people manipulating the supply. The computer network, the Bitcoin monetary network, is functioning by itself without human intervention. The only intervention and only involvement that humans have is that they spin up the mining rigs, they spin up the nodes, they run the software, and the software talks to itself and does its thing because it was programmed that way. And
that is the fundamental difference between Bitcoin and a lot of these other cryptos. But where I always laugh is that Bitcoin maxis will say, that's why Bitcoin is different and everything else is trash. Well, because Facebook can issue shares, does that mean the value of Facebook is zero? Like, because XYZ coin doesn't necessarily have a fixed cap supply, does that mean the network is worth zero? I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
There's just trade-offs, right? There's trade-offs. And if you want, that's why you could say, like, look, if you're not interested in learning about these other networks or anything, don't. Just buy Bitcoin. That's fine. That's cool, man. Like, I love it. Like, I'm on board. Hell yeah, that's great. But there are so many similarities between Bitcoin and crypto and traditional, not necessarily maybe Bitcoin, but crypto and the stock market. But I don't know, man. I think it's always fun to talk about this stuff because saying it out loud helps you kind of articulate your own ideas and get stuff out. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about, I've told you before. I think all the time about getting back into real estate, and then I look, and I go where the world is going. Right, that's all you can do, and the world is going digital. Right, like if I want to own real estate, I'll buy, fractionalized shares of triple net lease companies. Right, like if I want to earn, so like, and I'll have the idea is to have the liquidity behind the token to exit because they're in theory is somebody who's going to want that 7 or 8% return, right? Like, and if I don't want it, I can get, but these are things that instead of having all my money tied up in one location in one jurisdiction, with one company, right? Like, no thanks, right? So I think, as people kind of learn about this and the world simultaneously moves forward, there's going to be a lot of interesting options that become available. But I think what you're witnessing right now is just the inevitable, right? You can't print money forever. You can't bail out banks forever. You can't, it just doesn't work, right? At some point it stops. And this could go on for a long time, but Bitcoin is there with a certain set of rules, fixed cap supply, and that's very attractive to people in this world right now because everything else seems to change.
Well
What do you
said.
think? Call it that enough for today? We're over an
Well,
hour, so we kind of ranted a
that-
little bit, but it was fun.
well, the world keeps turning, and there's still many, many more people in the world that are going to wake up tomorrow and they're going to discover Bitcoin and the rest of the crypto universe for the first time. So there's that. I mean, I just, I don't know how much value there is in trying to drag people kicking and screaming, into
None.
the future. So,
None.
and I agree with that. Like, there's really no value. So, the people that are going to get it will get it, and we keep moving. We keep our eyes are on the front of our head for a reason, and we look forward and we we, we look for the best path forward and try to stay solvent and stay free at the same time. And
It's a full-time job these days, my friend.
yeah, so
All right, man. Sounds good. We'll catch you tomorrow.